Washington just received a message that changes everything. Saudi Arabia, America's most critical Middle Eastern ally for the past 79 years, has quietly delivered the most consequential geopolitical refusal in modern history. They're not attacking Iran. They're not isolating Iran. They're not following the script that's kept the petrodollar system alive since 1973. And here's what nobody's telling you. This isn't a negotiation. This isn't posturing. This is the activation of a pattern that has destroyed every single global hegemon in recorded history, without exception, without mercy, without a way back. The numbers tell you everything you need to know. $34.5 trillion in U.S. national debt, $183 trillion in unfunded liabilities, inflation officially at 3.4%, but realistically running between 8 and 12% when you measure it the way we did in 1980. And now, for the first time since the oil embargo that nearly collapsed the American economy 52 years ago, Saudi Arabia is saying, no, not maybe, not later. No, this is not about diplomacy. This is about thermodynamics. This is about historical inevitability. This is about a pattern that has replayed itself across empires, currencies, and power structures for 3,000 years. And every single leader who thought they could break this pattern, every economist who claimed this time is different, every empire that believed in its own exceptionalism, ended up in the same place: collapse, hyperinflation, loss of reserve currency status, geopolitical irrelevance. You're watching it happen right now, in real time. And most people won't understand what they're seeing until it's already over. Let me show you the pattern. It's simple. It's brutal. It's mathematically certain. There are 4 stages. Stage 1, the hegemonic power establishes control through a combination of military superiority and financial architecture. They don't just dominate through force, they dominate through structure. They create a system where client states, vassal nations, and regional powers are economically dependent on following the hegemon's directives. The system works because everyone benefits. At first. Stage 2, the client states grow wealthy within the system. They accumulate capital, they develop infrastructure, they build military capability, they become economically sophisticated. And here's the critical part. They become necessary. The hegemon needs them just as much as they need the hegemon, maybe more. The dependency becomes mutual. The leverage shifts, slowly, quietly, until one day the client state realizes something terrifying and liberating at the same time. They have options. Stage 3, the client state begins testing boundaries, small refusals, diplomatic delays, trade deals with rivals, quiet realignments. The hegemon responds with pressure, economic sanctions, military threats, diplomatic isolation. But here's where the pattern becomes irreversible. The hegemon's threats only work if the client state believes the hegemon will follow through. And the hegemon will only follow through if they can afford the consequences. And by stage 3, they can't. The debt is too high. The military is overstretched. The currency is debasing. The empire is running on momentum and reputation, not actual power. Stage 4, the client state refuses a critical directive, not a minor trade dispute, not a diplomatic disagreement, a fundamental rejection of the hegemon's authority. And the hegemon has 2 choices: enforce the directive through military action and risk total economic collapse, or accept the refusal and watch the entire system unravel. Either way, the pattern completes itself. The empire ends, the currency dies, the power structure collapses. This isn't theory. This isn't speculation. This is historical record. Let me show you. 1775. The British Empire controls the most sophisticated financial system in human history. They've built a mercantilist trade network spanning 6 continents. The American colonies exist within this system. They produce raw materials. They purchase British manufactured goods. They use British currency. They follow British trade law. The system works because it's mutually beneficial. Britain gets cheap resources in captive markets. The colonies get protection, infrastructure, and access to global trade. But the colonies grow wealthy. Stage 2 activates. By 1770, the American colonies have developed their own manufacturing capability, their own shipping networks, their own banking systems. They're still dependent on Britain, but Britain is now dependent on American resources and markets. The leverage has shifted. Britain needs revenue. The 7 Years' War cost them £146 million, double their national debt. So they do what every overextended hegemon does. They extract more from the client states, the Stamp Act, the Townsend Acts, the Tea Act. Not just taxation, control. Britain is reasserting authority over an economic system that's already moved beyond their capacity to control. The colonies start testing boundaries. Stage 3. The Boston Tea Party isn't about tea. It's about refusing a directive. It's about asserting independence within the economic structure. Britain responds exactly how the pattern predicts. Military pressure, the intolerable acts, closing Boston Harbor, quartering troops, economic punishment designed to force compliance. And then comes stage 4. 1776. The colonies don't just refuse British directives, they reject the entire system. The Declaration of Independence isn't a legal document, it's a geopolitical refusal. And Britain faces the exact choice every hegemon faces at this stage: enforce compliance through total military commitment, or accept the loss and try to salvage what remains. They choose enforcement. It bankrupts them. The American Revolutionary War cost Britain another £114 million. They win battles, they occupy cities, they demonstrate military superiority, and they lose the war anyway. Because by 1783, enforcing control costs more than the system was worth. The financial architecture collapses. Britain remains a power, but they're no longer the hegemon. That position shifts west, to the very client state that refused them. Check, verified, undeniable. 1959. The Soviet Union sits at the apex of communist global power. They control the largest land empire in human history, 14 satellite states in Eastern Europe, communist parties in 73 countries. And most critically, they've just established the People's Republic of China as the crown jewel of communist expansion. 600 million people, the world's largest population, a brother nation, a client state within the communist financial and military architecture. The system works. Stage 1 complete. China receives Soviet technology, Soviet expertise, Soviet military protection. 15,000 Russian advisors train Chinese engineers, build Chinese factories, establish Chinese nuclear programs. The Soviet Union gets strategic depth, ideological validation, and a massive Asian ally that pins down Western resources. But China grows powerful within this system. Stage 2. By 1958, China's industrial output increases 400%. They're manufacturing their own weapons, training their own scientists, developing independent foreign policy goals. And Mao Zedong realizes something Khrushchev doesn't want to admit. China doesn't need the Soviet Union anymore. Not the way they used to. The dependency has shifted. Ideological differences emerge. Stage 3 begins. Mao criticizes Soviet de-Stalinization. Khrushchev questions Mao's great leap forward. These aren't academic debates. These are boundary tests. China starts making independent decisions. Trade deals with Yugoslavia. Diplomatic outreach to Pakistan. Border disputes with India that the Soviets refuse to support. Small refusals, testing Soviet response. The Soviet Union applies pressure, economic pressure. They withdraw technical advisors. They cancel nuclear sharing agreements. They demand compliance with Soviet foreign policy directives. Standard hegemon response. Exact same playbook Britain used in 1773, and it produces the exact same result, 1960. Stage 4 activates. China doesn't just disagree with Soviet policy, they reject Soviet authority entirely. The Sino-Soviet split isn't a diplomatic dispute. It's a geopolitical divorce. China refuses to follow Moscow's directives on foreign policy, nuclear weapons, or ideological interpretation. The communist monolith fractures. The Soviet Union faces the same choice Britain faced: enforce compliance militarily or accept the loss. They choose a hybrid approach: military posturing on the border, continued economic pressure, diplomatic isolation. But they can't risk full-scale war with a nuclear-armed state of 600 million people. The cost is too high. So they accept the split. And the moment they do, the entire communist financial architecture begins its long collapse. The Soviet Union survives another 31 years, but they're no longer the undisputed communist hegemon. The client state that refused them eventually becomes their greatest geopolitical rival. The pattern completes itself. Check. Verified. Undeniable. 1965. The United States dominates the global financial system through the Bretton Woods arrangement. Every major currency is pegged to the dollar. The dollar is pegged to gold at $35 per ounce. The U.S. holds 70% of the world's monetary gold, 15,000 metric tons in Fort Knox and the New York Federal Reserve. The system is mathematically perfect. America prints dollars. The world accepts those dollars because they're convertible to gold. America controls the printing press and the gold reserves, ultimate financial hegemony. But America's NATO allies grow wealthy within this system. Stage 2. France, West Germany, Britain. They accumulate massive dollar reserves. They rebuild their economies. They develop independent central banks and sophisticated financial systems. And Charles de Gaulle, president of France, looks at the numbers and sees something that terrifies American Treasury officials. The U.S. is printing more dollars than they have gold to back them. Vietnam War spending, Great Society programs. The U.S. money supply increases 38% between 1965 and 1970. But the gold reserves don't increase. They decrease. Foreign governments are holding more dollar claims than America has gold to redeem. It's a mathematical impossibility hiding behind political power. De Gaulle sees it. Stage 3 begins. 1965. France starts testing boundaries. They demand gold for dollars, not threatening, just politely exercising their legal right under Bretton Woods. The U.S. sends them gold, France continues. Between 1965 and 1968, France converts $1.8 billion into gold. Other NATO allies watch. West Germany starts converting. Spain, Switzerland. The gold reserves at Fort Knox drop from 15,000 metric tons to 10,000. Then 9,000. America applies pressure, diplomatic pressure, political pressure. Treasury officials visit European capitals explaining that converting dollars to gold undermines the Western alliance, that it weakens America's ability to defend Europe against the Soviet Union. That this time is different, that American economic strength makes the gold backing unnecessary, pure hegemon response, identical to British arguments about colonial taxation, identical to Soviet arguments about communist unity. August 1971, Stage 4, Britain demands $4 billion in gold, not a boundary test, a full refusal. They want their gold, they want it now. They're exercising their legal right under the exact system America designed. And Richard Nixon faces the choice. Honor the commitment and watch Fort Knox empty completely within 6 months, or refuse and collapse the entire Bretton Woods system. He chooses refusal. August 15th, 1971. Nixon closes the gold window. No more dollar to gold conversion. The Bretton Woods system dies instantly. The dollar becomes a pure fiat currency backed by nothing but U.S. military and economic power. And what happens next? Exactly what the pattern predicts. The client state that forced the refusal, Britain, they lose empire status completely. But the hegemon that had to break its own system to maintain control, they enter a new phase, a more fragile phase, the petrodollar phase. Check. Verified. Undeniable. Now let's apply this pattern to what's happening right now. Today, in real time. Stage 1. The United States establishes petrodollar hegemony in 1973. After Nixon closes the gold window, American power needs a new foundation. Henry Kissinger negotiates the most brilliant geopolitical arrangement in modern history. Saudi Arabia agrees to price all oil sales exclusively in US dollars. In exchange, America provides military protection, weapon systems, and guaranteed security. Every country that needs oil, which is every country on Earth, needs dollars. Constant structural demand for US currency. The dollar becomes the global reserve currency, not because it's backed by gold, but because it's backed by oil. Black gold. And Saudi Arabia is the central bank of oil. The system works perfectly for decades. America prints dollars. The world needs those dollars to buy oil. Those dollars flow back to America through Saudi purchases of U.S. Treasury bonds, weapon systems, and infrastructure contracts. It's a closed loop, a perpetual motion machine of dollar dominance. And Saudi Arabia sits at the center of it, accumulating wealth beyond imagination. $900 billion in foreign reserves, an economy built on oil revenues of $350 billion per year, a military equipped with American F-15s, Patriot missiles, THAAD systems. They're the anchor client state of American Middle Eastern power. Stage 1 complete. Check. But Saudi Arabia grows powerful within the system. Stage 2. By 2024, they're not just pumping oil. They're the chairman of OPEC+. They control global oil prices through production decisions. They built sovereign wealth funds worth $1 trillion. And the Public Investment Fund owns pieces of Uber, Lucid Motors, Nintendo, major stakes in European football clubs. They're developing Neom, a $500 billion futuristic city. They're diversifying beyond oil, building tech infrastructure, quantum computing research centers, AI development hubs. And here's what changes everything. They've developed alternative relationships. China is now Saudi Arabia's largest trading partner. Not America. China, $296 billion in bilateral trade in 2023. Russia coordinates oil production strategies with them through OPEC+. Iran, their historical enemy, is negotiating security agreements mediated by China. The dependency structure has shifted. America still needs Saudi Arabia to price oil in dollars and maintain petrodollar hegemony. But Saudi Arabia doesn't need America the same way anymore. They have options. Stage 2 complete. Check. 2023. Stage 3 begins. Boundary testing. Small refusals. Saudi Arabia cuts oil production despite American demands to increase supply and lower prices. Biden administration officials visit Riyadh. They ask for production increases to counter Russian oil revenues and ease American inflation. Saudi Arabia refuses, politely, diplomatically, but firmly. No production increase, 2024. They go further. Saudi Arabia considers pricing oil sales to China in yuan. Not a threat, just exploration. Discussions with Chinese officials about currency diversification. The Treasury Department goes into quiet panic. If Saudi Arabia prices even a portion of oil sales in yuan, the structural dollar demand decreases. If structural dollar demand decreases, dollar strength decreases. If dollar strength decreases, the $34 trillion in debt becomes harder to service. The entire architecture trembles. More boundary tests. Saudi Arabia joins the BRICS partnership framework discussions. They normalize relations with Syria. They reestablish diplomatic ties with Iran through Chinese mediation. Each move is a small declaration of independence. Each move says we're making decisions based on Saudi interests, not American directives. Washington responds exactly how the pattern predicts. Diplomatic pressure, intelligence releases about Saudi human rights violations, congressional threats to withdraw military support, NOPEC legislation proposals, all designed to remind Saudi Arabia who the hegemon is. But here's what American officials don't seem to understand or refuse to acknowledge. The pattern doesn't care about intentions, doesn't care about special relationships, doesn't care about mutual interests. The pattern cares about mathematics. And the mathematics say that when a client state has sufficient wealth, sufficient alternative relationships, and sufficient independence, the next stage activates, inevitably. Stage 3 complete. Check. Now we're in stage 4. And this is where it gets terrifying. Because stage 4 isn't about incremental boundary testing. Stage 4 is about fundamental refusal. The directive has been given, the most critical directive in the entire petrodollar system. And Saudi Arabia's response changes everything. The directive is simple. Iran cannot be allowed to achieve regional hegemony. Iran cannot be allowed to develop advanced nuclear capability. Iran cannot be allowed to dominate Middle Eastern oil politics. This has been U.S. policy for 45 years, since 1979, since the Islamic Revolution. And Saudi Arabia's role in this system has been equally clear. They're the counterweight, the Sunni power balancing Shia expansion, the American ally that prevents Iranian dominance. Washington needs Saudi Arabia to maintain this posture, to isolate Iran economically, to counter Iranian proxies in Yemen, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, to support American sanctions architecture, to coordinate with Israel on Iranian containment. This isn't a request. This is the foundational requirement of the entire Middle Eastern security framework that keeps petrodollar hegemony stable. And Saudi Arabia just said no. Not publicly, not dramatically, no press conferences, no declarations, just quiet diplomatic realignment. Saudi Arabia and Iran are normalizing relations. They're reopening embassies. They're coordinating on regional security. They're discussing economic partnerships, Chinese-mediated talks that completely bypass American input. The Saudis aren't attacking Iran. They're not isolating Iran. They're not following the script that's kept American Middle Eastern dominance intact since Carter administration. This is the refusal. This is stage 4. This is the historical moment when the client state looks at the hegemon and says, we're making our own decisions now. We appreciate the relationship. We value the history, but we're not taking orders anymore. And here's what makes this absolutely irreversible. Saudi Arabia isn't doing this because they hate America. They're not doing it because of MBS's personal ambitions. They're not doing it because Chinese influence is corrupting their decision-making. They're doing it because the mathematics of their position demand it. Look at the numbers. Iran has 88 million people. Saudi Arabia has 36 million. Iran is right there, across a narrow waterway, close enough to hit Saudi oil facilities with drones, which they demonstrated in 2019 when they knocked out 50% of Saudi oil production in a single strike. America is 7,000 miles away. American protection is theoretical. Iranian missiles are real. Iranian proxies are embedded in Yemen, aiming at Saudi cities. Iranian influence spreads through Iraq, Syria, Lebanon. Saudi Arabia did the math. The math says regional security with Iran is more valuable than strategic alignment with a declining hegemon who is $34 trillion in debt, politically unstable, and increasingly unable to project power reliably. The math says China is the future. $296 billion in trade versus $114 billion with America. The math says oil priced in yuan might actually be worth more than oil priced in dollars if the yuan is backed by the world's manufacturing superpower. The math says refuse the directive. So they did. And now America faces the exact same choice Britain faced in 1776. The exact same choice the Soviet Union faced in 1960. The exact same choice Nixon faced in 1971. Enforce the directive militarily and risk total collapse, or accept the refusal and watch the system unravel. Military enforcement means what exactly? Invade Saudi Arabia? Sanction them? Withdraw military support and watch Iran immediately dominate the Gulf? Every option accelerates the collapse. Every option proves they can't enforce compliance. Every option completes the pattern. Accept the refusal, and what happens? The petrodollar system fractures. If Saudi Arabia can refuse American directives on Iran, they can refuse directives on oil pricing. If they can normalize with Iran without American permission, other Gulf states follow. UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain. The entire American Middle Eastern security architecture collapses. The structural dollar demand that's kept U.S. debt serviceable evaporates. Interest rates spike. Inflation spirals. The reserve currency status dies. Either way, stage 4 completes itself. The pattern is absolute. Verified. Undeniable. Happening right now. You know what people say when they see this pattern developing? They say this time is different. They say technology changes everything. They say American military power is unprecedented. They say the dollar is too entrenched to fail. They say global interdependence prevents major realignments. They said all of this before, every single time. British officials in 1775 said the colonies were too dependent on British manufactured goods to seriously pursue independence. Soviet planners in 1959 said communist ideology made the Sino-Soviet alliance permanent. American economists in 1970 said the Bretton Woods system was mathematically sound and politically unbreakable. They were all wrong. Because the pattern doesn't care what you believe. The pattern cares about debt levels, currency debasement, overextension, and mathematical impossibility. And right now, today, all four of those factors are worse than they've ever been in American history. 34.5 trillion in debt. Debt to GDP ratio at 124%. A number we haven't seen since World War II. Except after World War II, America was the world's creditor nation. We held the gold. We had the manufacturing base. We had no serious rivals. Today, we're the world's largest debtor. We have 8,000 tons of gold and 34 trillion in debt. China holds the manufacturing base. We have rivals everywhere. The federal deficit is running at 1.7 trillion per year. That's peacetime. No major war, no financial crisis, just structural deficit spending that requires rolling over trillions in debt every year at whatever interest rate the market demands. And the market is demanding more. The 10-year Treasury yield hit 4.7%. Debt service costs just exceeded defense spending for the first time since World War II. We're paying more to service old debt than to maintain the military that supposedly backs our hegemonic power. Currency debasement is accelerating. M2 money supply increased 40% during COVID. They printed $9 trillion in 2 years. The purchasing power of the dollar has dropped 86% since 1971, since the exact moment Nixon closed the gold window and started the petrodollar system. And now the keystone of that system, Saudi Arabia, is quietly walking away. This time isn't different. This time is exactly the same. The pattern is playing out with mathematical precision. So what do you do? What's the actionable insight? What's the move when you see this pattern activating in real time? First, understand what you're watching. This isn't a temporary diplomatic dispute. This isn't negotiation theater. This isn't Saudi Arabia playing hard to get before returning to American alignment. This is stage 4. This is the irreversible phase. The phase where client states refuse directives because they can, because the math demands it, because the hegemon can't enforce compliance without destroying themselves. Second, position accordingly. If the petrodollar system is fracturing, dollar-denominated assets become riskier. Not immediately, not tomorrow, but structurally. Over the next 5 to 10 years, the reserve currency status doesn't collapse overnight. It erodes, month by month, refusal by refusal. UN-priced oil deals, BRICS payment systems, central bank dollar reserve diversification. Each small move compounds. What does positioning mean practically? It means understanding that treasury bonds, long considered the safest asset on earth, carry structural risk now. It means understanding that the dollar's strength is political, not mathematical, and political strength is evaporating. It means looking at hard assets. Gold, silver. Bitcoin if you understand the technology and risks. Real estate in stable jurisdictions. Productive businesses with international revenue streams. Assets that maintain value when currency debasement accelerates. Third, understand the timeline. Stage 4 doesn't complete in months. Britain took 7 years from the First Continental Congress to final victory. The Sino-Soviet split took a decade to fully crystallize. Bretton Woods unraveled over 6 years from first French conversions to final collapse. This Saudi refusal might take 5 years, maybe 10, but the direction is set. The pattern is activated. The timeline is irrelevant to inevitability. Fourth, watch the markers. You'll know the pattern is accelerating when you see specific events. Saudi Arabia announces oil sales to China priced in yuan. That's a marker. OPEC Plus excludes American input on production decisions. That's a marker. Gulf states establish alternative security arrangements that don't include American military presence. That's a marker. The Treasury auction fails because foreign central banks aren't buying. That's a marker. Each marker tells you how far along stage 4 has progressed. Fifth, ignore the noise. The financial media will tell you this is temporary, that Saudi-American relations are strong, that the refusal is just leverage for better weapons deals, that Iran normalization is superficial, that the petrodollar is permanent. They said the same things about every historical example. They're not lying. They just don't see the pattern. They're analyzing individual events instead of systemic structure. They're looking at trees instead of forest. You see the forest now. You see the pattern. You see stage 4. And here's the hardest part. You can't stop this. No individual can. This is historical force. This is mathematical inevitability expressing itself through geopolitical events. The debt is already accumulated. The currency is already debased. The overextension is already complete. The client state has already achieved sufficient independence. The refusal has already been delivered. What you can do is understand it. What you can do is position your assets, your career, your family's future around this understanding. What you can do is make decisions based on pattern recognition instead of wishful thinking. What you can do is survive the transition that's coming and potentially thrive in whatever system emerges after this one collapses, because something will emerge. Something always does. After Britain lost the colonies, the Industrial Revolution made them a global power anyway. After the Soviet Union lost China, they survived another 30 years. After America closed the gold window, they created the petrodollar system. Systems collapse and new systems form. The question is whether you understand the transition while it's happening or realize it after it's over. You're watching history, real history, the kind that gets written about for centuries, the kind that redefines power structures, currency systems, and global hierarchies. Saudi Arabia's refusal on Iran isn't a diplomatic dispute. It's the activation of stage 4 in a pattern that has destroyed every previous hegemon. The American empire isn't ending because of mistakes or mismanagement. It's ending because the mathematical realities of debt, debasement, and overextension make continued hegemony impossible. And the client state that was supposed to anchor the entire petrodollar system just looked at those mathematical realities and made the only rational decision available to them. They refused. The pattern is absolute. The outcome is inevitable. The timeline is irrelevant. This is happening right now. Whether you see it or not, whether you accept it or not, whether you prepare for it or not. The only question left is what you do with this understanding. Do you position accordingly? Do you protect your assets? Do you prepare your family? Do you recognize that the next 5 to 10 years will reshape global power in ways we haven't seen since World War II? Or do you tell yourself this time is different? Because I can tell you with absolute certainty, backed by 3,000 years of historical pattern recognition, backed by the mathematical impossibility of current debt levels, backed by the fracturing of petrodollar architecture happening in real time, this time is not different. This time is exactly the same. The pattern is playing out. Stage 4 is active, and the empire is ending. Not because of incompetence, not because of malice, not because of external enemies, but because this is what happens every single time, without exception, without mercy, without a way back. Check, verified, undeniable. The next few years will prove every single word you just heard. Watch Saudi Arabia, watch oil pricing, watch dollar demand, watch treasury auctions, watch the markers. And when each marker hits, come back to this moment, come back to this pattern, come back to this understanding, because the greatest investment you can make right now isn't in stocks or bonds or real estate, it's in pattern recognition. It's in understanding what you're actually watching. When the headlines scream about diplomatic disputes and temporary tensions and negotiation strategies, you're watching an empire end. You're watching a currency die. You're watching a client state refuse a hegemon. You're watching stage 4. And now you know exactly what comes next.